Hello, this is Nicholas Pellegrino, and I'd like to welcome you to Movie Prop Modeling from asileFX. And what we're going to be doing is taking a prop from a famous movie and modeling it in Lightwave 3D. And the prop we'll be modeling is this light sword from probably one of the most famous movies of all time. And because of that, I really don't have to say its name. And it's a fairly simple model. And what we're going to be doing is using a image reference, which I have found on the internet, and placing that in a background layer, or in the background of one of the viewports, and using that as a guide. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started with a new object. And I've already loaded into the image editor the image that we'll be using, and that's right here. Just a nice side view. It has a little bit of distortion from perspective, but that's okay, we can deal with that while we're modeling, and that's not really a big deal. I'll show you how to get around that. And that's of course included on the disk, and you can load that in just by going to load and selecting from the pull down menus of the CD or DVD drive. Alright, we're going to get started and hit D on the keyboard to bring up the display options, and click backdrop and go all the way to BR, which is the bottom right viewport. It's down here, and select that image. And we're going to change the image resolution up to 1024 so we can zoom in a lot farther to it and see a little more detail. And what we're also going to have to do is bring down the brightness and contrast of that image, because while we're modeling we can't have a fully vibrant image because the points will blend in with it and it'll be very hard to tell what we're doing. So we're going to bring the contrast down just about all the way and the brightness down just about all the way. And just so we can just see pretty much the silhouette and basic colors here and there, just as long as we can still see it. And Lightwave does not have an opacity setting for images. It would be nice to see something like that in the future, and it'd be a little bit easier to use. But we're going to do it, and click OK right now. And as you can see, the image is off a little bit from the center line. And what we're going to do is hit 0 on the number pad with the cursor over that viewport, which is going to maximize it. And now we're going to open the display properties again. That's D on the keyboard. Go back to our backdrop, and right now, since we have it full view, it'll just say single viewport, but it'll have the right image in the background. And we're going to change the center of the top one, which is going to be the Y, and just nudge it up until it looks like it's about centered. And that looks centered, so 84 millimeters. And we zoom out, take a better look at it. Yeah, that looks like it's centered. And we're not really going to worry about scale right now, the size of it, because we can just model it with this image the size it is, and it's going to be kind of large at this point. But all we have to do is, when we're done, we could just scale it down when we're finished with it to the size that it's supposed to be, and it's about 25 centimeters long. And we're going to get started by doing the first thing here is we're going to be adding points, and we're going to be using the lathe tool to create each one of these sections in the light sword, and a lathe and a polygon for each lathe, different ones for each section. And if we go through the sections here, section 1, section 2, 3 will be the silver part right here, 4 this black part, 5 will be these rings, and 6 will be this last part right here, and then of course the addition on top. And in order to lay down points, You hold down the Shift key and push the plus key, and that's going to bring up our points tool. And what we're going to be doing is right mouse clicking and creating points along the outline of the image. And I'm using 3 points for whenever we have a rounded edge. And we want to make sure that we round every edge, but some of them will be rounded more than others. And if you come up here and take a look at this, you can see that it's not straight. And in actuality, the light sword is straight in that section, and that's a problem with the image and that's going to happen with any photograph, and that's just a perspective problem. So we're just going to go along the line and make the assumption that it would be right here and create 3 points and then 3 more, and then come down and make 3. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and deselect that and push spacebar to deselect the tool that you're using, and click on a gray area to deselect all the polygons, or all the points. And I'm going to move this out just by using the lasso tool, right mouse clicking and dragging around the points to select them, and then T to move them. And we just want to fit it in as best we can with the image, so we're just selecting the points and hitting T for the move tool and moving them. Alright, now Shift and plus again to reactivate the points tool, and we're going to create 3 points right there and come down here. And right now we're just laying out basic points. These don't have to be very precise, we just want to get the points down, and then we're going to go and edit them in just a sec. And then and now the less rounded I want it, the more I'm putting the points closer together. Like right here, as you can see, it's going to be a much tighter curve than once you get up to here. I'm just going to go in and bring these in just a bit too. Okay, now we have our basic points laid out for our first section, and now we need to edit them to go exactly where we want them. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that we have a straight line between these 2 points and also in these sections right here. So what we're going to do is take this point and just select it and push the delete key to delete it. Then we're going to highlight this bottom point, and we're going to copy and paste, and then use the move tool to bring that up. And now, depending on how your keyboard layout is, copy and paste will be different. If you're using Lightwave 8.0, the default key for copy is Control-C, and paste is Control-V. But if you're using an earlier keyboard layout, which I am using, because I'm a little more used to the older keyboard shortcuts, it's just C and V. And when I did bring this point up, I constrained it. And always make sure you want to constrain it because we're trying to keep it straight. And I'm doing that with the middle mouse button. Now if you don't have a middle mouse button, you can hold down the Control key and just click, and that will constrain to whichever axis you want it to be on. And now the next thing we need to do is change this point right here. This is a little more going in a curve, and we're using the drag tool right now, which you can access by using Control-T on the keyboard. And that will be the same for just about every version of Lightwave. And we just want to make it look like it's going to be round. Okay, and then we're going to delete this point, highlight this one again, copy, paste, T to move, and then constrain it and pull it over. And that way we get a nice straight line when we do our lathe. And as you can see, the points we laid out before, that one was down here, so it's a little bit off. And just by copying and pasting them over, we make sure that we stay perfectly in line. And it's a lot quicker way than using the set value tool, which I'll be showing you in a little bit. Okay, and delete this point. Copy and paste, and move. And actually, for these points, we can just delete all three of them and use these ones and mirror them. Do that by using Shift V and then just left mouse clicking about in the center of where you're going to want it, and just pull it down a little, and then you'll get your mirrored points. And actually, it looks like we need to pull these down just a little. So I'm also using the drag tool again, which is Control T, just to pull these down. And we can delete this point, copy, paste, and move it down, and drag, Control T. And you can access most of these tools under Modify, and we have a move right here, and drag. And those are the major ones we're using right now. I prefer keyboard shortcuts, and I would definitely recommend learning the keyboard shortcuts because it will speed up your productivity, and you'll become a lot better Lightwaver because of it. I'm going to delete this point right here, copy and paste, and move it over. And then use the drag tool and fit those in place, and delete this point, copy and paste that one down. And we're pretty much just doing the same thing throughout the model, just to make it so we have these nice straight lines where we need them, and to make sure that we have our rounded edges where we need them. Okay, and delete this point, copy, paste, move that over. And this one we made a little large. We're just going to bring that in. And it can be a little repetitious, but it's well worth it in the end, and you'll end up with a much better model than if you were just to lay out the points randomly and not be so precise about it. Okay, and now actually what we need to do is take this bottom point and delete it, and then grab this last point that we created and copy and paste and move that down. But we don't need to move it all the way down the line, because what we're actually going to be using is the Set Value tool. And we're going to select these 2 points right here. And now, once again, depending on your keyboard layout, it's going to be V for default Lightwave 8 users, and Control V if you're using 7.5 or before that, actually. Pretty much the original keyboard layouts. And for the set value, we have each axis, and we're going to be doing this on the Y because we want to set it to this line right here. So Y, value at 0, and hit OK. And what that's going to do is bring it down right on the line at 0. And that's going to help for our lathe so that we don't get any holes in it. Okay, and now what we need to do is we're going to create a polygon. Now there are 2 ways to do this. You could create a polygon, or you could create a spline, and I'm going to show you both ways. So you need to select the points in order, and depending on which way you select the points, depends on which way the polygon is facing. And I can show that in a sec. Hit P to create the polygon. And we're going to hit 0 on the number pad again, so I can show you which way to create the polygon. Now it's facing this way, directly towards, which is actually the correct way. It would be the correct way. And if we were to select it counterclockwise, it would be facing the other way. And now most of the time you will be selecting your polygons in a clockwise fashion, but sometimes you will need to go counterclockwise, and it just depends on which way you need the polygons facing. Of course, if you do do it the wrong way, all you gotta do is go into polygon and hit the F key, and that will just flip it to the other direction. Okay, and now the other way of doing this, what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this real quick and paste it onto a new layer, and then hit 0 key on the number pad and maximize this, and we're going to hit K on the keyboard, which is pretty much just going to kill the polygon and leave behind all the points. Because if we were just to delete the polygon, it would delete the polygon plus all points connected to it. And what we're going to do is select all the points in order again. And if you mess up, all you got to do is just deselect what you messed up on and start reselecting again. And you can hold down the Shift key to continue selecting, or if you have a middle mouse button, you can just hold down the middle mouse button. And that's usually what I prefer to do. Okay, and now we're going to create a spline. In order to do that, you're going to hit Control P. And now the thing with a spline is that you usually need a few more control points. As you can see, this line right here is not perfectly straight. And the difference between using a polygon and a spline is the amount of geometry that is created once the lathe is created. So if I was to lathe this right now, as you can see, we have all this geometry in here, and lots of it around the edges and the corners, and it's just creating a lot of polygons that we technically don't need at this point. And I'm going to undo that now and go back to the polygon layer and lathe that. And for lathe, it's Shift L, and then you just click on the axis and it'll create your lathe. Now if you look at this version, the polygon version, we just have the points that we created, and this gives you a lot more control to be a little more precise about what you're creating, and we don't have those extra lines going through here, those extra divisions, extra polygons, and it's a much less low polygon model. So if I was to, actually I'm going to relathe that and just compare. If you hit the W key on the keyboard, it'll give you your statistics. Right now it's points, but if we go down here and select polygon, or we can hit spacebar and move the polygon, it'll give us our statistics for this layer. And the total right now is 4,056. But if we were to move it to the first layer, it's only 744. So that's a lot better. And the computer will handle that a lot better, and you pretty much get the same looking model. But once smoothing is on, it'll take care of just about everything. So we're going to delete that spline version. Actually, go ahead and undo the lathe that we created for the polygon version, because we don't have enough segments in there. And we're going to hit Shift L again to lathe this, and hit N on the keyboard to pull up this numeric. And for sides, what we need to do is increase the amount of segments going all the way around so that it's a lot smoother and it's not so polygon looking. And we're going to up that to 48. And as you can see, it looks a lot better. So you can just close that out, hit the space bar, and now we have our first section. And now one thing you can't really tell in this side view picture is that this actually goes inward, and it's more of a concave type end. So what we need to do is go in here and pull this section inward so that it kind of curves in. Well, not so much a curve, but it'll be straight. And go in, and I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is just take these polygons, make sure we're in the polygon mode, and select these, just going around in a circle a couple of times. Make sure you select them all. And another way to verify that is to go down here and you can see 48, and that's how many segments we have. Now we also need to select all of this area, and it'd be a little difficult to lasso this without getting unwanted polygons. So what we're going to use is the expand tool. It's going to be expanding the selection, and it's Shift and the right bracket key, and you hold it down and keep clicking that right bracket key, and it goes around and selects all the circular polygons. Oh, and I went too far. And if you go too far, all you have to do is hit the left bracket key, and it'll deselect. So shift right bracket to select the outer ring, and to deselect is shift left bracket. Okay, and now we have what we need selected. So what we're going to do is hit the T key for move, and constrain by using the middle mouse button or holding down shift and clicking, and just moving it in just a little, and not too much. And that's about what we need. And I can go back to the other model that we have completed, and as you can see, it does go inward. But we also have this hole right here, which is actually part of the model, but like I said, you can't see that unless you had a perspective view photo. So what we're going to do to create that extra hole now too is go ahead and select these polygons again, just going around and verifying that there's 48 selected. And we're going to be using the smooth shift tool, and that is Shift F. And now immediately we want to right mouse click and then hit H on the keyboard for the stretch tool. And what we can do is now pull in what we've created, this extra set of polygons. And now, if you don't want to have to go directly in the center and look at what you have down here, what you can do is change the mode to selection. And what that's going to do is take the whole selection, and no matter where you put the mouse, it's going to stretch it towards the center of that selection. And I'm also using the middle mouse button, or you can use Control and click to constrain this so that it's the same size circle. And we're going to go ahead, and that looks good, and smooth shift again. So Shift F and then right mouse click, H for stretch, and stretch that in again, constraining. And now we're going to hit T on the keyboard and move it in just a little. And we want to work our way into this curve. So we're going to smooth shift again. So Shift F, right mouse click to create that extra segment. H for stretch, pull it in just a little bit more. T to move. And one more time. Smooth shift it. Stretch it inward. Just a tiny little bit this time. And then move it. And this we can actually move back all the way. Deselect that. And now we have the first section of our model completed. And now we can go ahead and give this a surface name by hitting the Q key on the keyboard. And we're just going to call it section underscore 001. And as we move along, we're just going to give each part a different section. And actually what we want to do is, we did bring this in too far. So we're going to lasso these polygons right here and just pull it back out. Okay, and now I'm going to save it, just so that we don't lose the file in case Modeler seems to crash, or Windows or Mac OS crashes. And we're going to move on to section 2. So we're going to open a new layer and put the other layer in the background. Okay, we're going to model this next section the same way that we modeled the other one. Hit the 0 key on the numeric pad, the number pad, to maximize that viewport, and Shift plus for the points tool, and create a point right here. Going inward just a little bit, so we're going inside that other section, and then come up here and 3 points, kind of a tight curve on that, and 3 points, a little bigger, and then 1. And this is a fairly simple section. And we're going to use the drag tool again, which is Control T, just to move these points around. And now this one doesn't have to be straight, so we don't need to copy and paste because this one is angled down just a little. But we do want this section right here to be straight, so what we're going to do is make sure we're in points mode and deselect the points we just created and delete that one right there, copy and paste and constrain and pull that upward, and then use the drag tool and make sure that's how we want it, and constrain that, pull it down, make it just a little bit tighter. And there we go. And we seem to have lost that point right there. It's probably still selected, and we deleted it along with this one, so we're just going to add that point again using Shift and plus and right mouse clicking and creating that point. And this one is also angled down slightly, but maybe not that much. Okay, now we need to take our polygon or our points on the edges, copy and paste, and move them down. And while they're still selected, using the set value, which is either Control V or just V, depending on your keyboard layout, and 0 on the Y once again, and spacebar to end the tool, and you can deselect it. And now we're ready to create our polygon. So we're going to select all these points in order, and push P on the keyboard. And now we have our polygon. And Shift L for lathe. And before we do that, actually, we're gonna bring that up just a little, not so it's straight, but just so it's not so angled. The angle just a bit too much. Alright, so Shift L again for lathe. And we should still have the same settings as before, 48. And that was N on the keyboard for the numeric, and space, and that section is completed. And because this section is going to be interlocking with other sections on both sides of it, we can go ahead and delete these polygons just by selecting them, pushing the delete key, and getting rid of them because we do not need them. And now before I go any further, I'm going to edit these surfaces a little so we can kind of see what we're working with a little bit more. So first I'm going to assign this new section a surface name, Q on the keyboard, and call it section 2. And I'll pull up the surface editor, which you can reach up here, and that's either F5 on the keyboard or Control F3. Once again, that depends on your keyboard layout. And under section 1, we're going to change the color and make it just a little bit darker gray. And make sure we turn on smoothing, and up the specularity to 100%, and the glossiness down to about 23. And if we take a look at that layer, that's how that looks. And now we're just going to copy and paste that for section 2, but we're going to change the color to more of an orangish look, just so it matches that kind of rust color. But we don't need it to have such a high specular value, so we'll just reduce that and up the glossiness, and making sure smoothing is still on. And now we can take a look at that right now, and our model is starting to come together. And if you take a look at the finished model, although the surface names are a little bit different, it's starting to look the same. Alright, now we can move on to section 3. So we open a new layer, hold down Shift, and click these tabs underneath, put them in the background layer. And now we're going to create just this ring right here. Just this small silver ring, because the next section is black. Alright, so Shift and the plus key to create our points, and create 3 of them, and align them how we want them. by using the drag tool again, which is Control T. And then we're going to mirror it again, Shift V, and just mirror these points over. And that's about the size we want. I actually take these points, select them, T to move, and move them in just a little. And now we also need to take these bottom 2 points, copy and paste, T, move them down just a little, and then set value. And 0 on the Y. And select the points in order, P on the keyboard to create the polygon, Shift L for lathe, and pull it out on that axis. And now we have our next section created. And Q on the keyboard, change the surface name to 3, and we'll just pull up the surface editor again, and copy from 1 and paste onto 3. Alright, and now we can also move on to section 4. And this is pretty much the same as section 2. So we're going to Shift plus key, create our points, and go in just a little bit into the previous section. And this is going to, when you get to these rings, this is going to be the next section here. So we can just go into that just a little. Undo. And select those new points. 0 on the numeric to expand the view. And this is going to be straight. So what we're going to do is delete that point, copy and paste, and bring that over. And use the drag tool, Control T, to define that roundness, that curving. And it does look like there's another section coming out here, but that's just, once again, the perspective distortion from the photo. Alright, and delete this point, copy and paste, and move it down, constraining it. Edit that, the drag tool. And we can delete this last point over here, and copy and paste this bottom one over and into the next section. Grab our endpoints, copy and paste, and you really don't need to move them down. I like to move them down so that I can see that I have for sure left behind the other points before I set value. Do that again. And now select our points in order, P on the keyboard, Shift L for lathe, and make our lathe section. Alright. And once again, we can delete our end polygons, because we're not going to need those. And we can give this a surface name, section 4, and pull up the surface editor. And for section 4, it's just pretty much black, so we're going to pull it down all the way black for the color. Make sure we turn on smoothing, but we can't have it jet black, because otherwise we won't have any definition in it, so we'll turn up specularity and bring down the glossiness. And as you can see, we have most of our sections coming together here. And hit S on the keyboard just to save it so we don't lose anything. And we're going to move on to the next section. Put everything in the background layer by using the Shift key and clicking the lower tabs of the layers. And now we're going to start defining our points for this section. And we're going to do this all as one polygon and one lathe. We could do it as each individual ring, copying and pasting them over, but we want all of this to be connected in here, so there's a nice smooth, and we'll pick up a highlight along the edges, and we don't want a sharp crease by having two cloned items or copied and paste items right next to each other, interlocking. Alright, so we're going to Shift plus again to create our points. Create one right here, and then we're going to do 1, 2, and 3, and then 1, 2, 3, and we're going to use the drag tool to reposition these. And this is a little difficult right here because you can see there's not a lot of spacing, not as much as there is over here, and that's just the perspective. So you kind of got to eyeball it and kind of know what you want. Okay, and this is angled just a little, so we're going to pull that. And now we also need to keep surfacing in mind for this, because what we have is a separate surface for these rings right here. And I want to be able to do that simply without putting an image map on there. So what we can do is just make sure that we take in between this point and what's going to be the other point over here is going to be the polygons for that surface of the ring. And we're going to deselect these points we just created, select just the top three, and mirror, Shift V again, just pull that down. And we want to move these so it's about the right size of the ring. And now when we lay this polygon that will be created all the way down here, all the polygons, that will be the surface for the ring, and then everything else will be that black surface, which we can just copy and paste over from the previous section. And now we can't just copy and paste this part over to here because, as you can see, it changes and starts to flow in. But once we get that finished, we can just mirror it over and copy and paste and keep bringing it over. So we're going to select the points tool again, which is Shift plus tool, and right mouse click in these points, and use the drag tool again to position them correctly. And this is a kind of a tight curve in here. Let me see how that looks. That looks pretty good. Alright, so we select these points and mirror them over. And we can't have that far apart. We do have to make up for the distortion a little. But once we define the spacing in here, it's going to have to be that way all the way around. So we kind of want to take a look at how much it's going to be between the ring and this black section when it goes down. And maybe just a little bit more. Okay, that looks good. Now we can take these top points up here, and we can mirror them from the center down here. And that's not lining up perfectly. We're going to move these, select these points, and move them in just a little bit more. And we still have enough time to define this area down here. And that looks like it's good. So what we're going to do now is just take this section right here and copy and paste and just move it over. And then copy and paste and move it over. And now we can select all of these and copy and paste that and just move that over. And then copy and paste again. And just do that until we get all the way down to the end, which we've done it exactly. And we can delete these last 2 points and take this point and move it into the next section. And that looks how it should. So we'll take these the endpoints now, and we're gonna copy and paste and move them down a little. So they frame that using Shift A to frame selected within the viewport, and we're gonna set the value Y 0 on the Y. And now we're ready to create our polygon. And for this we're going to need to be zoomed in a little bit more and want to be able to see what's going on. So the 0 key on the number pad to bring it up full view and go around and just select all of our points. And this can be a little tedious, but you will get a much better look doing it this way than if you were to copy and paste them all over. Okay, that looks good. Now we can go ahead and just lay that. And that looks really good. And before we move on, we're going to define the surfaces of the rings. And delete, actually, these end polygons. Just moving around in a circle, making sure you select them all, verifying down here that you have all 48 selected, pushing delete. And I'm going to take a look at this one. Yep, we can delete those too, because those are inside. And pull that up full. Yep, that looks good. Okay, and now we're going to select our polygons for this ring surface. But actually, before we do that, we're going to call this section 5. And pull up Surface Editor and copy from 4, paste onto 5. And bring this back full screen. Shift A to frame selected. And then just going through and selecting all the polygons in the centers for the rings. Doing it nice and slow so that we make sure we select all of them, because if we were to go a little too fast, sometimes it can skip polygons. Or, if you go too fast, you might select ones you don't want selected. We're going to take a look at that. It looks like we've got them all. So we'll hit Q on the keyboard. And section 5, rings. And we can deselect all of that now. And actually, if we look at this, we left a few polygons in there for that front, so we could just select those and delete those. Alright, and now we're going to change the surface on the rings, and we could just copy that from another silver layer. And pretty much the same surfaces throughout. There's only 3 real surfaces, main surfaces on this model, which can be copied and pasted over, and that's the silver, the black, and the orange. Now I want you to take a look here at what smoothing is doing to these rings. And that's because we don't have a lot of geometry defining the rings, so when it comes to smoothing, it's smoothing it too much. Now we could adjust the smoothing angle, which you can do by opening the surface editor, and right down here we have the smoothing threshold, which will change that. But then we'll lose our nice smoothing that we have in the inside. And the best way to fix this is to go ahead and create these as a separate object, and they'll look like they're connected, but they're actually not. And what we're going to do is push the W key, and that's going to pull up our polygon statistics, making sure polygon selected down here, and under surface, selecting the rings, pushing the plus key, and that's going to select everything that's named that surface, so all of our rings. And what we're going to do is push cut and paste, and that's either Control X or just X, and Control V or just V. And now if you look, the rings look a lot smoother, and they're not rounding or smoothing into the other object. And all we've really done is just separated the points and doubled them along the object. Because if we were to hit merge right now, which is M on the keyboard, you'd see that it deletes 864 points, and it goes back to looking the way it did. So we can undo that, and if you can see the difference. It looks a lot better if you separate it. And now created an extra 864 points, but that's really not too many considering the total complexity of this model isn't very high. So we're going to take a look at all of it so far. And we compare it to the finished model and see how that looks. Like I said, the surfaces are changed just a little, but you get the same idea. We're going to S on the keyboard to save what we currently have. And now move on to the next section, which is the final of the main sections. And put everything in the background layer. And go ahead in here and start creating the points now. Okay, we're going to hit Shift and the plus key to open up our points tool and just start laying these points out, just like we did on the other ones. And making sure that it's inside a little. I'm just using the drag tool right now, Control T. Alright, and actually, 0 key, the number pad to pull this up full view. And this is such a small area right here, we don't need to worry about aligning those perfectly. Okay, and now what we're going to do is select this point right here, copy and paste, and move that over all the way to the other side, because we don't really need to worry about this right now, because what we're going to actually be doing is knifing that to create the geometry in there and smooth shifting it, which is going to be a lot easier. Okay, and bring up our points tool again and create R3 for the curve. And again, a little tighter down here. And then 1, 2, 3, and then right here we have 6 of these small sections jutting out, and there are 2 ways to model that. There's the easy way, and then there's the way that looks good. And the way that looks good is a little bit harder, but it's well worth it. And what you can do is you could create this box, just create one, and use the array tool to array it around 6 times. But what's going to happen is we're going to get a sharp crease from where this piece is connecting to the piece we're modeling right now, and it won't get that nice smooth highlighted look in there. So what we're going to have to do is model that separately after we lathe it, and there's no way to do that by lathing. So we're going to create, actually deselect, undo, deselect what we have right now, go in here and kind of define these points a little bit more, just so we know what we're working with. And we do need to raise it up just a little bit, and for this we're only going to add 2 points to define that curve. And now we can go in here and delete this point, copy and paste, constrain, pull that down, and the same thing over here, delete this point, copy and paste, move it over. The move tool is T on the keyboard, and then we'll drag that into place. And this is angled just a little, so we don't need that to be perfectly lined up. What we are going to do is mirror that over, so Shift V, and that's not perfect, so select it, use the T move tool to move that into place. And actually it looks like we're raising it up a bit too much, so we're going to take these 2 points and move them down. And actually, it's still a little too high, so we're going to use the stretch tool, which is H on the keyboard, and change our mode back to mouse, so that it's stretching to where the mouse is and not in the center of what we have selected. And go in here where this point is, and you can either use Control and click or middle mouse button to constrain that, and just pull it down. And there, that looks good. Right. and go back to creating our points. And delete that, copy and paste that over. And you also really can't tell this section right here too much, but there actually is a small piece that comes out, like a small cylinder, and we're going to add that in. But we don't want it going out too far, 'cause it's just a small cylinder with a nice tight curve. Okay, and delete this point, copy and paste this one down to make it straight, which means we need to drag, use the drag tool, Control T to edit that just a little. And zoom in there. And there, that looks like that's good. Now, as I was saying before, we could actually we're going to use the knife tool to create this, but I kind of changed my mind, and we are going to use points to define this little inset in here. So, we're going to grab this point over here, copy and paste, and move it over. And kind of zoom in, and copy and paste again, and bring it out on the other side. And now what we're going to do is change the mode back to selection and copy and paste H, which is stretch tool, and move that in. Use the move tool, bring it down. Maybe not so much. Stretch and pull it out again, and then copy and paste again and move it down. And now we want a nice tight curve in here. Oops, undo that. So we're going to copy and paste it again. Use the stretch tool, pull it in. And T to move it down. And that will define a nice looking curve in there. And one last thing we need to do before we create the polygon is select these two endpoints. Copy, paste, move them down just a little, make sure that the new points are there. Set value, 0 on the Y. And now we can go in and select the points in order to create our polygon. And you might want to make sure that you zoom in so you can see all the points being selected. Because if we don't select them in order, we're going to need to kill the polygon, or undo it, and go back and redo it again. Because it's very important that you select all of them in order. Otherwise the polygon will be distorted. Alright, now hit the P key, and we can lathe it. And we take a look and see how that looks. And that looks really good. The only thing is, if you look, we have this weird distortion in here, and that's caused by smoothing. And actually we have that throughout the entire model. And that's one of the disadvantages of using the point method for polygons for creating these lathed sections. But there's a real easy method to get rid of that distortion. And first what we're going to do is give this a surface name, section 6. And then open up our surface editor, and we can just copy and paste that over. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use the knife tool to define another polygon next to every single curve, and these sections will look straight again, and the curves won't blend into each other so much. So we're going to use Shift K to open up the knife tool and just draw out a line right there. And as you can see, that already started to fix the way that surface looks. More rounded on the edge where it needs to be, and a lot straighter in the center. And just go through using the knife tool and just create these cuts. And we need to create ones in the center in here. And as you can see, the model is already starting to look a lot less distorted and a lot nicer than it did before. And depending on where you put these cuts to, it also defines how much smoothing is going to be on that section. But we're actually going to leave this part alone right here. You can see there's a little bit of distortion, but we need those polygons exactly where they are right now so that we can do our bevel to create these six sections. And once we create those other sections, it'll get rid of that anyway. Alright, so we're going to move backward and go into our other sections now and knife them. And this one doesn't really need to be knifed too much because it's got a lot of geometry. But this other one needs to be knifed. And if you just watch in the perspective view up here, as I'm moving the knife across it, you can see it really fixing that smoothing. And it looks a lot more precise. And that one doesn't need it. And this one will go through and add a few knives to it. And once again, the knife is Shift-K on the keyboard. And I'm also using the middle mouse button again to constrain this knife so that it's perfectly straight, or you can use the Control key. And also too, if you have a section like these two are exactly the same, you could right mouse click along and it'll just create that knife and create a new one. We're going to undo those because we don't need them. And move on to this last section here. And what we're going to do now is we have these extra polygons in here, or the inside polygons, and we don't really need to knife those because they're in the inside. And another reason we don't want to knife them is because it'll create geometry that we don't need. So what we can do is just select a few right there and shift. Oh, that's not going to work. And it looks like the best way to select these is go ahead and select this outside ring. Then go inward. Oh, redo. Oh, sorry. Select those and move it outward. And then you can go in and deselect. And that seems like it's a little time consuming, and it is. So there is another way you can do it. So we're going to deselect that and go in here and just select all these polygons. And then deselect the ones we don't need on the sides. And that turned out to be a lot quicker method. And we're going to hide these now and get them out of the way. We're not deleting them, we're just hiding them. So you're using the minus key on the keyboard. And that will hide those polygons so that we don't cut through them. And we didn't select that cap on the end right there. So we can, to show them again, use the backslash key, which is right above enter or return. And we're going to reselect those again. And then also just go through and select this cap, which we can lasso that to make sure we get them all, holding down shift so that we're continuously selecting and not deselecting, and then hit the minus key again, and that will hide everything we don't want cut. And then we use the knife tool and you go in and just define exactly what needs to be defined. And now also, because we have this curve in here, or this kind of concave section, we don't want to knife through that. So we're going to use the bandsaw tool, and we're going to unhide what was hidden, the backslash key, and just select a few polygons in here. Go up to multiply, the multiply tab, click bandsaw pro, pull up numeric, enable divide, and that's automatically going to cut that section just in that loop. And now we want this cut right here to be a little bit closer to this front ring, so it's more defined. So all we have to do is make sure that we're in edit right here, and change the value upward, and as you can see, it's moving that slice to where we need it. Hit space to end that, and now we have a perfect cut where we need it. And we also need to, along here, use the bandsaw tool, because as you can see, there's not a lot of definition, and you can't really tell that it's going inward too much. It looks kind of like a flat surface. There's not enough rounding up here, and that's just because we don't have enough geometry. So what we can do is select a few polygons in here, go to Bandsaw Pro, and it'll automatically select those. Numeric, and it still has our previous settings from before, but we also want to add a few more slices in there. So first we're going to edit this first slice that we already have, and bring it out more towards the edge. Go to Operation, Add, and add another one on the other side. As you can see, that adds it right there. And another one right next to that. One more over here. And slowly getting smoother and smoother, and then one right down the center. Hit space to end that tool. And that looks a lot better now. As you can see, because we added that geometry, it's a lot more rounded on the edge. And we also get that nice rounding into the inside of here. If I undo it, and then redo it, you can see how much it's changed just by adding that little bit of geometry. And that way we don't have to really mess with the smoothing and screw up the rest of the object. And also we can use the same surface throughout. And we have pretty much the main section done now, and we're going to go in and add those 6 little parts that jet out of this section. Go ahead and zoom in here. Okay, and we're going to save this real quick before we get started on the next section, just by hitting S on the keyboard. And now one thing we need to keep in mind is that we have 48 sides, or 48 polygons going all the way around, and we need 6 of those extruding pieces. So if we divide 6 by 48, we're going to get 8. So that means every 8 polygons will be a section. But we don't need all 8 of those polygons to be that section, because there is a little bit of space in between each one. So we're going to use 5 polygons and skip 3, and then another 5 polygons and go all the way around. So just select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, skip 3, and then another 5, and skip 3, alright, alright, and that's perfect. But we're going to be using the smooth shift tool for this. And if you notice, because we have 5, which is an odd number, compared to what we used for the outer edges, which is an even number, as you can see it's off just a little, and that's going to throw off our modeling a tiny bit. So what we want to do is go into point mode so we don't deselect what we've just selected, and we're going to rotate this, making sure selection is selected as our mode. And actually go back to polygon and take a look what we need. And we need to move it over so this is in the center right here. So go back to point mode, rotate, which is Y on the keyboard. And we just want to make it as close as we can. And if we go back to polygon mode, now it's going to be even on all axes. And rotating that's not a big deal. It's not going to throw off our model at all. We could actually rotate the whole model and it wouldn't change anything because it's a lathed object, and it's the same all the way around except for this back part right here on this object. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use smooth shift, and that is shift F on the keyboard and right mouse click, and then use H for stretch. And make sure we constrain it, and it's going to go out just a little. And actually this can get a little difficult when working with this many polygons doing this. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to go back and have these polygons selected now that we know that everything's going to be centered, and we want to be able to bevel this. But in order to bevel, we need to have one polygon per section, because if we were to bevel it right now, as you can see, it would bevel each polygon individually. And if we use smooth shift, we don't get an inset. And it's going to be kind of difficult to go around and change each section. So we can go ahead and change this to one polygon for each section, or there's also one more thing we can do, and that is deselect our polygons and make sure we select the top 5, and what we can do is take these and cut them and paste them into another layer, and now we can just smooth shift this one individual, and we're going to array it, and we can paste it back into this layer. But before we do that, we need to go through and delete all of our other polygons. So back to where we were before, where we skip 3 and then select 5 and then just hit delete. And 1, 2, 3, skip 3, and select 5, and hit delete. 1, 2, 3, and then 5. Whoop. Yep. One, two, three. Okay. So now we've deleted all these, so we're relying solely on these polygons that we have left right here. Alright, so we're going to select those, and now we're going to use smooth shift and right mouse click and move, and we're also going to use the stretch tool and pull them in just a little because we want to define a nice curve. And smooth shift again, and move it up. Use the stretch tool again, constraining, and pull it in just a little bit more, just so we have our extra geometry in here, and it's smoothed out. And smooth shift again, and this time move it up to as high as each section is going to go. And now if you look right here, this model is actually tilted a little bit sideways, So it's a little hard to tell exactly how high they have to go. And if you look, it's probably about right there. So you just kind of have to eyeball it. And as you can see, they go inward. Alright. But they are flat on top. So what we're going to need to do is use the stretch tool, which we already have, and flatten that out just by pulling it all inward. And that way we have a nice flat top on there. But we're also going to need to round that. And we're going to move it down just a little. Smooth shift it again. Pull it up. And move it inward. Smooth shift it. And this is the last time. We can make sure we're constraining. And now it's nice and round. We're going to need to add a little bit more geometry right there. And maybe a little more down here. And as you can see, we're getting a little bit of weird smoothing. But if you go from far away, it seems to look alright. Okay. So now that section is complete. And if you look right here, it's jetting out. Get that one section. Now all we have to do is array it around, and then we're going to copy and paste it back into that other layer. So in order to array, use Control Y, and we're going to do a radial array, and we're going to do it along the Z axis, and center 0, 0, 0, because we're working right on the 0, and number is going to be 6. And this is a total number, not how many copies you are making. So we have 1, we're creating 5 copies, the total is 6, so number 6. And push OK. And we have a look. It arrayed all 6 of them around. And take a look, and they all line up perfectly. So what we're going to do now is cut these and paste them into the other layer. Hit M on the keyboard to merge all these points. That's 72 eliminated. And now if you take a look, it's all one continuous object. Now the other way we could have did it is if we didn't delete these other polygons first, and we didn't select the other polygons and copy it onto another layer, but then we wouldn't have this nice kind of smoothing in there, and we get a nice accent because of that. But now we can go ahead and knife it kind of down here and see how that looks. And as you can see, the smoothing is kind of taken over the object a little, and it makes it look like there's extra geometry or kind of an extra piece in there that's tilted that's not supposed to be. So we're going to undo that and just kind of leave it the way it is. And sometimes there's only so much you can do with it when you have smoothing on, and especially with polygon modeling. But from far away it looks really good. And I'm going to go ahead and compare it. And it looks about the same. Just a little bit different. And maybe not so rounded on the top, but that's okay. You could go back and change that if you want to. And we're going to save it real quick. And now pretty much the main part is completed. If you notice, on the main model here we have a sort of belt clip ring on here. And for that, we're going to need to create... See, if you notice here we created a hole, but it's added a lot of distortion. And actually what we can do is just take this and model this ring, this little clip, and just make it go directly through. So we're going to go back to our object we're working on right now, create a new layer, put this in the background, the section we just modeled. And now we have to create this ring. And in order to do that, we want to make sure actually that it matches up correctly. So I'm going to use the other one as a template. And I'll be including the completed model, so you can also use it as a template if you wish. We're going to copy that and just paste that in another layer. And I'm going to show you how to model that now. And I'm just using this so I know I have the right size, because I did have to do a little guessing earlier because of the way the image is distorted a little. As you can see, it's, you know, this light source is tilted a little when the photograph was taken. And mostly because of these nubs we have right here. You can't set it directly on there, so it's set in between these. Alright. And now in order to model this ring, we're going to be using the rail extrude. And in order to use this, we have to set up our spline first. So we're going to open up the disk tool. So create disk. And just kind of, we're using the points from the disk. And we're going to kill the polygon on it. It's okay on the keyboard. And delete all the points we don't need, which are all of these. Actually, that one too. Just so we have a nice flow in here. And now we can mirror that over using the center line here. And we're also going to create another disk. About right there. Maybe a little more inward. Okay. And hit K on the keyboard to kill that polygon. And now we can delete these points that we don't need. And now what we're going to do is pretty much the same thing as creating a polygon. We created a spline earlier too, but this is going to be a closed spline. So we're going to select these in order. Now before we hit Control P to create our spline, but as you notice there's a large gap in here. So we're going to undo that, and if you hit Control O, it'll create a closed spline. But the problem with this right now is that if we're going to rail extrude this, we need to create a disk in another layer, and it needs to be aligned with the starting point of this. And the starting point is right here. And it needs to be perpendicular to this line, which is sort of curved. So what we're going to have to do is kill this spline we made, and take this middle point, copy and paste, and just pull it in here into the center. And we want to copy and paste this and make sure it lines up. And it does. We delete that. And we're going to use that new point as our starting point for that spline. And I'll show you that in a sec. Select these in order, Control O to close it. And now you can see our starting point is this new point we've created right here. So we're gonna, actually we can put this in the background layer, and we're gonna actually put the other ring in the background layer too, because we're gonna use that as a template just to create our disk. And that's the size we want. And now we can delete that ring. And now we're going to put that spline in the background layer. And now, in order to do a rail extrude, we're going to bring that in the center, just using the move tool. And this has to be perpendicular with the line. And like I was saying before, if we were to do it over here on a corner, we'd have to rotate, use the rotate tool to rotate this disk so that it matches up, and this way it could just be straight and we don't really have to worry about it. Alright, so now we're gonna, now that we have the spline in the background layer and this polygon in the foreground layer, hit Control R, and that's gonna bring up our rail extrude options, and we need to use uniform knots, and that's gonna group up the geometry around the edges, the roundness, and not uniformly throughout because we don't need geometry on these straight parts. And we're going to bump that up to 25 and see how that looks. That looks good. So now we've just did a rail extrude and we've turned a disc into this by using a spline. And we can delete our spline because we don't need it anymore. And take our new objects we just created and use the move tool and just move it into place, which is in between. And if you look over here, it's kind of going into that section, so we're going to use Y for rotate. Make sure the mode is on mouse, because we want to rotate from this, where the mouse is at, and not from the center of the object. And just rotate that upward so it's resting on the top of the object. And take a look and see how that looks. And that looks perfect. We're going to give that a surface name. Section 6. Actually, we'll call it belt clip. And go to the surface editor and copy and paste. And now we can also cut this and paste it onto that layer. And since all the major modeling is done for this main section, before we move on to this part right here, we can go ahead and just cut and paste everything from each layer onto the first layer so that it's all one object, or all on the same layer, because when we import it into layout, or if you import it into layout, then it will be one object that you move around and not multiple. Unless of course you were animating this, then maybe you'd want the belt clip on a separate object so you could rotate the pivot from there. Okay, now we're going to move on to the control section of the light sword. Alright, so we're going to start a new layer and put this one in the background. And we're going to start laying out points to create this section, which we can't just use a box because it is rounded, and we also want to have a nice smoothing. If you look at the model that's finished, you can see that kind of rounds inward into the object, and there's a little more definition there. So I'll go back to our object that we're working on, and make sure this is in the background layer. And now we're going to create a disk. And make sure we create it from the center. And we want to match it up on the top right here. Just actually make it just a little bit bigger. And we're also going to add more sections. Let's see how it looks with 48. Yeah, 48's good. And now we're going to kill this polygon and take the points that we don't need and go ahead and delete them. And now by looking at this, you kind of have to judge the size of how big that is. And yeah, that looks about right. Put that back in the background there. We're going to move this over to the front, where the front of it is. And now we're also going to add some more points. And for this, we're just going to use this endpoint right here, and we're going to copy and paste it and move it, and copy and paste and move it. And the reason we're using copy and paste is that so the points stay about equal with and level with each other, and we don't have to worry about them being all over the screen and having to modify them. But we also need to match up with the curvature, so we're going to grab these new points and hit Y and we're going to rotate from this other point right here, making sure that the mode is mouse, and just match it up with the curve. Alright, and now we can go ahead and delete these other points on the other side, and just use these other ones since we already have the curve over here, and just mirror that. And same thing for the other side. We can just mirror that over and match these points up, constraining them to where they need to go. Actually, just a little bit over that. Okay, now we're going to select them in order and create a polygon out of it. And as you can see, the polygon is going into the model, at least it looks like it is, and that's just because we have a several point polygon and there's a lot of distortion, but that's all going to change in a sec. And now we're going to use the extrude tool, and we could use smooth shift, but we want to keep this bottom polygon because we're going to be using it to kind of bevel downward into the other object. And we want to make sure we have enough space in here between the two objects so that we can have a nice curve in there. It looks like there is. Okay, so now we're going to use the extrude tool. And in order to do that, it's Shift E, and then you just pull out the section. And we'll raise it up to what it looks like. Yeah, about right there. And we're also going to need to edit these points. So select all the top points, H to stretch them, and just pull them all down, and that's just going to straighten it out. And now, because that original polygon was kind of facing the wrong way, hit F on the keyboard, and that's going to flip it. And make it so our points are facing the correct direction. Okay, and now we're going to use that bottom polygon to kind of bevel inward to connect the objects. See, because there's that gap right there, and we want to have a gap, but we also want to have it smoothed into it, like as it was placed on top of it. So we're just going to use the bevel tool, which is B. And it actually looks like there's a little bit of distortion because of that. So we're going to undo it, and we're going to use smooth shift instead. So Shift F, right mouse click, and move it down just a little. Just so it's just touching that other object. And then we're going to use the stretch tool, H on the keyboard, and just pull it in a little bit inward and outward. Now if you take a look, we have a nice rounded edge butting up against the other object. And that looks a lot better than if it was just kind of pushed into it. Kind of like these are right here, they're kind of pushed into it. And this gives just a lot more definition to it. And we can compare that to the other object. Okay, it looks good. Now the next thing we need to do is create this top section right here. And it's a lot easier to use this than the reference photo because we don't have a perspective view of this image. And actually what we can go ahead and do is open up display properties, and under backdrop BR, bottom right, we can just remove that image because we don't need it now and it's kind of getting in the way. Okay, so we go back to our light sword, the one we're working on, and we're going to change the surface name on this to we're just going to call it top main. And what's the color on that? That's kind of that gray. So we just copy and paste that. Before we go too far into it, well, so we're going to knife on the sides over here, so we get our definition in here. And maybe move that in just a little closer. And knife it on top. And that looks a little better. We can also delete that bottom polygon, because we won't be needing that anymore. Okay. And now for this next little lip part on top, we're going to pretty much do the same thing as we did before for creating this. And we're just going to lay out points. And this doesn't have to be exact right now. Actually, one more in here, just so we know how many points we're working with. I'm going to expand that all the way. And now start to define the roundness of this object. Okay, we can delete that point, actually deselect all these points first, and delete that point. Copy and paste to move it up, and that way we have a straight line. And edit that rounding, and then delete these points and just mirror that over, and we can delete that point, copy it and paste that down. Undo, make sure we constrain that when we pull it, and this is a very tight curve in here. And we can delete this point and delete this point. Select these two, copy and paste, and now we can set value, not on the Y this time. Undo. On the X. We'll take a look at that. And compare it to the other model, just as a reference. Alright. And now we are going to take these points over here and mirror them over. And now select them in order. Hit P and zoom in a little just to make sure that we have them all in order. And put this in the background layer. Now extrude, Control E, or sorry, Shift E. And we're getting a lot of distortion here. And flip that, and we're still getting these kind of weird polygons right here, and that's because of the shape of the polygon. And what we can do to fix that is we can either bevel it, and we'll take a look and see what happens when we bevel it. And that polygon is a little too messed up for that. So we're going to have to split it. And in order to split it, we need to select the polygon that we want to split, and then go, we're going to switch this to wireframe shade, just so we can see where the edges are. And now select these points, and hit Control L, and that will split it. And grab this one. Oh. And split it again. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Grab that point and this point, and split it. And this one, and split it. And now the polygon just needs to be flipped. So, and this one's still pretty messed up. So we're going to try to split that. Keep that selected. Select these 2 points. And Control L to split. And that kind of takes care of that. And as you can see on the other one, we didn't really have too much of a problem there with that. But in this one we actually did a little bit different of a method for modeling it. But to get the same effect with this, and instead of going on the other side and just splitting those, we can just knife this down the center to create some geometry. Delete this side. We get some extra polygons in there, we can delete those. And then mirror it right where you knifed it. And merge. Actually, I want to make sure these are connected, and they are. And now we have that same on both sides. But we do need to change the size now to match up. And just needs to be a little bit of an overhang. And we can use the stretch tool to kind of create that overhang on both sides. Not too much though. And take a look at that. And switch this back to the textured view. And that's looking good. Now we have to change the surface of this. Check out the other model. That's orange. So we're going to call this top main top. Open up surface editor, find the orange, and paste that onto there. And now we need to create, as you can see, this little box in here. And the sizes are a little bit different. But it's not too bad. We were working with a rather crude picture for a reference photo. So a little bit of change, different modeling isn't too bad. Create this box here, and make sure it's inside just a little bit and not flush. But we also need to create segments, because we have striping, and I'd rather do that with polygons than with an image map. So add segments, when that was using the up arrow, and then if you want to remove segments you can use the down arrow. And give this a surface of top bars 0, 1, and select every other polygon so we get that nice striped look. Go to Q, bars 2, and go back to the surface editor and paste orange on some of the bars. Actually, I think it's on the, yeah, and then find our black surface and paste it on the rest, and take a look at that. And it's really starting to come together. And take a look at our finished model again. And the next thing we have to do is just add this little block right here. And that's pretty simple. So we can just open a new layer, zoom in here, create a box, and now we have to remove these segments. So we use the left key if you're in this viewport, or the down key in this viewport, depending on where the cursor is. And we'll just create the box out here. And want it to be about, not perfectly flush with that top part, but really close. We don't want to see too much of a gap in there. And this should be flush with the side, almost flush anyway. Okay, and now we want to round the edges on this. So what we're going to do is just use the bevel tool for this box. And that's B on the keyboard. And that's a little bit too much. So we're going to zoom in here to the corner and watch the perspective view and just see how much it needs to come in. And that looks pretty good. So now we're going to give this a service name. Top main black. Oh. Can't type right now. And black side. And copy and put a black surface on there. Now if you notice in the other model we have kind of a line going down, a little definition in there. So we can add that. Just open up our here. And we're going to put that box in the background so we can figure out where that line needs to go. We're going to use the knife tool, which is Shift K, and just cut in there and go in and grab that polygon, the ones that were created. We're going to smooth shift it. So Shift F, right mouse click, and use stretch, and which is H on the keyboard. Pull it in just a little, and then you T to move it in just a little, and then smooth shift it again, stretch it in just a little bit more, and move it. And now you've got that definition. And if we want to fix that smoothing error, just go in and add some knives on the side. And now we have that little bit of definition right there. And this top part's a little bit smaller than the one we're making right now. This one's a little more high up. Little differences aren't really a big deal. And the next thing we're going to model is our little buttons, the up and down buttons, which adjust the length of the sword. And we want to use the other ones as a template since we no longer have that image in there. So just copy and paste that into a layer, and now we can use it as a template. And these we just created by making a few points. Pretty much the same way we made the spline for the belt clip earlier. Alright, hit P on the keyboard. This doesn't really need to be perfect. And now we're going to extrude it. You can see that's inside out, so we F to fix that. And we can delete that reference now. And we're going to change the surface on this really quick to top main, button, and green. And we need to now bevel this outside polygon so that we get a nice smooth look on that button. And the bevel is B on the keyboard, and just pulling it out, and then right mouse clicking and pulling it out again. Okay, now we need to fit that button in the right position. Put that right there. And make sure it's only coming out a little bit, because we don't want it coming out too far. And now we can mirror that. And then change the surface of this one to button red. And now we can go in and change the surface on these. You've got our other surface name in here, but that's alright. And we're just going to copy from the silver layer onto the buttons and just change the color. So kind of a greenish blue looking button and a red button. A little bit darker. Oh, forgot to copy and paste that. There we go, now we have our buttons. And the last thing we need to add is our screws, and then we'll be finished. And if we look at our other model, we just have our screws off to the side just a little. And all we did for that is create a disc, just a small disc. And we don't need quite so many segments on this, so I'm going to pull up numeric, change sides to 24, push space, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a surface name. Call it screws. And now I need to split this top polygon because I want to get that nice little line in there. So I need to select the correct points and then hit L, Control L, sorry, to split it. And we're selecting all these points right now, all four of them. We just deselect the back ones and split it because all we need to do is split that top polygon. And now we deselect the polygons and select just these two, and hit B on the keyboard for bevel, and just pull it out and shrink it in just a little, and maybe once more. And now we're going to use the knife tool to kind of define where that inside screw, or part of the screw is, and also one more down here. And we're going to take our silver surface name and copy and paste that onto the screw. And now we can mirror, actually we don't even need to mirror that, we can just copy and paste that over. And see if those are coming out far enough. Yeah. That looks good. And now we're just going to cut and paste all the way down and put it on the final model. And now the main part of the light sword is complete. We could add the beam. I can show you how to do that. It's kind of a final part here. Just give you an idea if you did want to animate this, how to model the beam. And the easiest way is just to use a disc. And I'm going to try to figure out the right size here. And pull up the numeric and change the sides to 6. because we're going to be using smooth shift, or not smooth shift, but sub patches on this. And we're going to extrude it and flip those polygons because they're reversed. And just grab this last polygon and just go ahead and move it about the length of what the beam would be. And we need to size it down just a little because it does slightly slant. And then smooth shift it and stretch it inward. Oh, making sure that the mode is set to selection so we don't have to be in the center. And just give us kind of a round edge on here just by doing this. But one thing we need to make sure is that we can't subpatch this unless this is a 4-sided or 3-sided polygon. So we're going to need to split it. So keep the polygon selected. We're going to change this to wireframe shade mode, and we got points mode selected. And we'll just take these 2 points, Control L to split them, and now we can hit Tab, and it will subpatch it. And we get the error message because actually this polygon on the end over here hasn't been split, and we actually don't need it. But we're going to add a knife. I'm going to change this back to texture. And as you can see, now we have a nice rounded looking sword, and you can adjust the width of that, the length of that to however you wish. And we'll pull up Surface Editor again, just give it a quick surface. Actually, Q, and call it beam. And we're gonna give it 100% luminosity, but keep the diffuse nice and high, and change the color to, let's do blue. Actually, a green would look better. And there we have it. Our modeling is complete. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and learned something about modeling in Lightwave. And until next time, happy modeling.